Story 1. This is going to sound like I'm reaching, so I'll keep it focused and stick to the details that matter. I'm 22 now, and I just finished college not long ago. My family has lived in the same 3-story house since I was a little kid, since I was maybe 3 or 4. It's in a quiet, well-kept suburb, the kind of neighborhood you picture when someone says, safe area. Nothing ever really happens here, which is why all of this sticks out so badly. The only layout details you need are these. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor, and my window looks out toward the street. My dad's home office is on the 3rd floor, and the only window up there also faces the street. Those 2 windows matter. I'm writing this because after what happened last week, I'm fully convinced something is wrong, like something has been circling my family for no reason I can explain. And the worst part is, once I started replaying everything, I realized it might not be new at all. It might have been building for years. The first thing happened so long ago that I can't even tell you my exact age. I just know I was still in middle school, so it had to be at least 10 years back. It was a weekend morning, Saturday or Sunday, because I wasn't getting ready for school. I remember walking downstairs for breakfast and hearing my parents talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I caught enough to hear my dad say something about how it had happened again. The way he said it didn't sound like casual gossip. It sounded tense, concerned, like he was trying to keep his voice low, but he was still shaken. When I stepped in and asked what they were talking about, they shut it down immediately. They didn't snap at me, but they also didn't answer. Just a quick, nothing, and a change of subject. At the time, I let it go, even though it felt weird. They didn't actually explain it to me for a long time, over a year at least. But a few days after that morning, my older brother told me what the conversation had been about. My dad is a lawyer, and when he has a deadline, he'll work late at home if he has to. That night, he'd been in his office until the early morning. According to him, it was around midnight when he noticed a Chevy Suburban moving down our street at an absurdly slow speed. Not slow like cautious. Slow like it was barely rolling forward, like the driver wasn't pressing the gas or the brake, just letting it creep along. At first, he didn't attach much meaning to it. Cars passed by all the time. But then a few minutes later, he saw the same Suburban come back the other way, still crawling along like it was searching for something. That's when he started watching more closely. And then it got stranger. The Suburban stopped and parked directly across the street from our house, right in front of it. My dad sat there at his desk, staring out the window for several minutes, waiting for a door to open, waiting for someone to step out, waiting for literally anything that would make the situation make sense. Nothing happened. No interior light, no silhouette, no movement. It just sat there. He eventually forced himself back into his work, but he kept checking the window every so often. He told my brother he was sure nobody ever got out, because he would have noticed something, any shift, any motion through that window. Hours went by with nothing changing. At some point around 2 a.m., he nodded off at his desk without finishing what he was doing. When he woke up, it was around 5:30 in the morning. The sky was starting to lighten a little, that early pre-sunrise gray. He looked out the window, expecting the street to be empty. The Suburban was still there. Same spot, like it hadn't moved an inch. He said it hit him so hard that for a second he genuinely wondered if he was still half asleep and dreaming. But he wasn't. He watched it, wide awake now, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, sometime before the sun actually came up, it drove off. No drama, no sudden acceleration, just pulled away and disappeared. Even after it left, he couldn't relax. He finished his work, but he didn't go back to sleep. And later it came out that this wasn't the first time he'd noticed cars drifting up and down our street late at night. That one was just the most extreme, the one he couldn't shrug off. Back then, though, nobody treated it like a major threat. Years went by without anything obvious happening. We told ourselves it could have been someone asleep in their car, parked in a bad spot by coincidence. Or If we wanted to be more suspicious, maybe someone was cruising through nicer neighborhoods looking for houses to break into later. Either way, it stayed in that category of unsettling, but not enough to obsess over. Then a few years later, it happened to me. I was 15, a sophomore in high school. I stayed up late a lot back then, messing around on my computer and making beats in my room. My desk sat right under my window, and because the window faces the street, I could glance out without even standing up. That night, I had my headphones on, focused on what I was doing, when something outside flickered, just a quick flash of light that didn't match street lights or car headlights. It caught my attention immediately because it looked deliberate, like someone aimed it. I turned toward the glass and saw multiple cars, at least 3, moving down the street slowly. And it took me a second to understand what I was seeing, because the movement wasn't the scary part. The people inside the cars were shining flashlights at the houses. They weren't using the lights to see the road. They were sweeping the beams across front yards, windows, porches, garage doors like they were scanning. One of the beams dragged across the neighbor's house first, slowly, methodically. Then the light shifted toward ours. The moment I realized the beam was about to cross my window, my body reacted before I could even think. I dropped down under the windowsill, pressing myself low so I wouldn't be a shape in the glass. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and in the silence under my headphones, I suddenly noticed how loud my own breathing sounded. Almost immediately, the flashlight beam hit my room. I saw it spill across the ceiling and the upper wall, bright and flat, like someone was painting my bedroom with light for a few seconds. I stayed frozen, staring at the underside of my desk, trying not to move at all, when the light finally slid away and everything went dark again. I counted in my head before I rose back up. By the time I peeked out again, the cars were farther down the street. I watched them reach the end and turn off onto another road, and then they were gone. I didn't sleep much after that. Even with my door locked, I kept replaying it. The next morning, I told my parents, and for once, they didn't brush it off. We agreed on the most likely explanation: people casing houses, looking for easy targets, homes that looked empty, or homes where they could get a sense of who was awake. After that, my dad got serious about security. He installed a Ring camera, and he also added security cameras and motion-activated lights in the backyard. I can't say for sure, but I think my parents also asked around with neighbors to see if anyone else had seen the same thing. A couple of years went by, and then something else happened, something that made it harder to pretend it was random. My dad hired some contractors to do landscaping in the backyard. While they were working near the fence line, one of them found something tucked into a bush. It was a tiny hidden camera, small enough that you could mistake it for something harmless if you weren't paying attention. About the size of a car key. It wasn't wired into anything. It ran on a battery, but the battery was dead by the time it was found. There wasn't a SIM card in it, and there wasn't a memory card either, which meant it wasn't saving footage on its own or uploading it through cellular service. But that didn't make it less creepy. If anything, it made it worse because my dad explained that it could have been streaming live to someone nearby while it still had power. Like someone could have been parked within range, watching in real time until the battery finally died. None of us could figure out why someone would take the time to hide a camera on our property and then just abandon it there. That wasn't something that ended up in a bush by accident. It had been placed. My dad was furious, but he had no idea when it happened or who did it. He went through months of stored security footage, whatever was saved, and didn't find anything useful. I honestly thought it had to be a prank. I started grilling my friends because it was easier to believe some idiot teenager did it for a laugh than to believe a stranger was watching our house, but none of them admitted to it. No one even acted guilty, and my parents weren't laughing. They reported everything to the police. The frustrating part was that we already had a strong security setup by then. It wasn't like there was one obvious weak spot to fix. So after a while, life did what it always does. It moved forward. The fear didn't sit over us every day like a storm cloud. It was more like a bad memory that occasionally came back when you were alone at night. Years after the camera incident, Our next-door neighbors moved away. Their house sold fast. Within weeks, it was lived in again. That itself wasn't strange. Our area is popular, and houses don't stay empty long. What I did notice was that the new neighbors weren't a family. It was a younger couple with no kids. The house was big for 2 people, which struck me as odd, but I wrote it off. Maybe they planned to have kids. Maybe they just wanted space. Not long after they moved in, I started seeing something that felt off. On multiple occasions, at weird times, either very early in the morning or late at night, I'd catch them looking into our yard from their top floor window. At first, I assumed they had a desk up there like my dad did, and they just happened to be near the window while working. But they weren't sitting, they were standing. Every time, I told myself I was overthinking it. I'm the kind of person who notices patterns, and sometimes that makes you feel paranoid even when nothing is happening. So I didn't accuse them of anything. I just filed it away as strange and tried to laugh it off. Like maybe they were obsessed with our yard layout or something stupid like that. Then one night, I was out walking my dog, passing their house along the street, and I looked through their large bay window into their kitchen. They were at the table like normal, but this time there was a third person with them. I noticed him instantly because his appearance was hard to forget. He was bald, completely bald, and built like he spent most of his life in a gym. What really stood out weirdly were his eyebrows. They were thick in a way that made his face look more severe. The 3 of them were just sitting there, talking like it was a normal night. But as soon as I looked in, the woman got up quickly and pulled the curtains closed over the window. She didn't lean forward and stare at me. None of them did. There wasn't an obvious caught you moment, but it still felt like she did it because she somehow knew I was watching, even though I was outside and it was dark and I wasn't making noise. I kept walking, but I didn't forget that man. Not because he did anything overt, just because his face was so distinct that it burned into my memory. At this point, if you're reading this, you're probably thinking I sound unstable, like I'm connecting unrelated events and building a story out of nothing. Honestly, if a stranger sent this to me, I'd probably think the same thing. That's why I never would have told it like this, except for what happened last week. So last week, years after the neighbor stuff, I went to Paris with my family. My older brother had been dating his girlfriend for a long time, and there was this unspoken assumption that he might propose on the trip. We were traveling with her family too, so it was a big group. It was supposed to be a happy, once-in-a-lifetime kind of vacation. A few days in, we were all sitting in some random bar. Nothing fancy, just a place to get drinks and talk. We were in a booth, me, my parents, my brother's girlfriend, and her parents, laughing, drinking, having a good night. At one point, I drifted out of the conversation while I was halfway through my drink. I looked up and glanced across the room, and I saw a guy sitting alone in another booth. He was casually drinking, looking around like he was killing time, and something about him felt familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten before my brain even caught up. I stared a little longer than I should have, trying to place him. Then it hit me all at once, like someone flipped a switch. It was the same man I'd seen years ago sitting at my neighbor's kitchen table. The bald head, the build, those heavy eyebrows, the same face. For a second, I flat out refused to believe it. What were the odds? A guy I saw one time in my neighborhood, years ago, ends up in the exact same bar in Paris at the exact same time as my family. That's the kind of coincidence you tell as a joke. But the more I looked, the more sure I became. Then he looked right at me. We held eye contact for a moment that felt way longer than it probably was. And I can't explain it without sounding dramatic, but there was an understanding in that look that made my skin go cold. Like he knew exactly what I was realizing, like he was measuring whether I'd say something. He stood up without finishing his drink. He didn't stop to pay. He just walked away and disappeared into the crowd and the layout of the bar. I immediately excused myself from the table and tried to follow, weaving between people and looking around corners. but I couldn't find him. It was like he'd stepped into a different room and vanished. After a minute of searching, I went back and sat down, forcing myself to act normal because I didn't want to ruin the night with something that sounded insane. The only way I could keep myself together was by telling myself it was a look-alike, that it was coincidence, that my brain was digging up an old memory and slapping it onto a stranger. A few days later, during the daytime, we were doing typical tourist stuff, walking around, taking pictures, just being out in the city. It was bright out, crowded, loud, and then I saw him again. The same guy. This time, it didn't feel like a weird moment my mind could explain away. He was close enough that I could see him clearly, maybe 50 feet from us, holding a professional-looking camera. He was taking photos, and I couldn't say for certain that the lens was aimed at us, but it felt like it. Like we were part of what he was capturing, even though there was a famous monument behind us that any tourist would be photographing. I watched him for a second, trying to decide whether to confront him, and then he turned a corner and disappeared again before I could move. That was the moment I stopped keeping it to myself. I told my parents everything. I laid out every piece. The old Suburban, the flashlights, the hidden camera, the neighbors staring, the bald guy in their kitchen, and now seeing him twice in Paris. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't try to make it sound scarier. I just told it straight and told them I wasn't imagining it. To my surprise, they believed me. My dad believed me the most, which honestly scared me more because he's not the type to entertain paranoia. He even suggested we end the trip early. We didn't, but the rest of the vacation felt poisoned. Every time we walked into a crowded place, I found myself scanning faces. Every time someone raised a camera near us, I felt my throat tighten. When we got home, my dad went through as much security footage as he could, looking for anything suspicious while we'd been gone. He didn't find anything, and that's where it stands. I don't know what any of this means. I don't know who these people are or what they want with my family. I just know I've stopped believing it's random. When you stretch it out over more than a decade, the pattern feels too deliberate to ignore. And the only thought I can't shake now is that if they've been watching us this long, it's probably not going to stop here. Story 2. I live near Angel National Forest, and I've been hiking those trails for years. I know them well enough that getting turned around isn't something I usually worry about. I'm comfortable out there. That's part of why what happened still doesn't sit right with me, even now. The night it happened, I'd gotten a phone call earlier in the day that left me feeling hollow. The kind of news that makes being inside your own house feel suffocating. Some people go drink or call someone to talk it out. I've always done the opposite. When my head's a mess, I go walk it off. It was around 8 p.m. when I headed out. I wasn't trying to do anything extreme, just enough distance to clear my head and maybe wear myself down so I could sleep later. Hiking at night isn't unusual for me, especially on trails I've been on 100 times. Most nights it's quiet in a way that's almost calming. That night, though, the fog was on another level. I checked the weather before leaving, but I also know elevation does whatever it wants. Once I got a little deeper in, the visibility dropped hard. I'm talking maybe 20 feet in front of me, and everything beyond that was just a wall of gray. I tried using my flashlight at first, but it didn't help. The beam didn't cut through. It reflected back off the moisture and lit up the fog like a glowing curtain right in my face. It reminded me of trying to drive with high beams in heavy snow. It made things worse, not better. So I left the light off most of the time and let my eyes adjust to whatever faint ambient light was filtering through the trees. I had music playing on my phone, not loud, just enough to make noise. My dad always told me that if you're alone out there, sound can keep animals from getting too curious. It felt like a normal routine, nothing reckless, just a familiar trail, a familiar habit, and a bad mood I was trying to outrun. About an hour in, something changed. I picked up a smell, and it hit me so suddenly I actually stopped walking. At first, it was faint enough that I wondered if I imagined it, but then it got clearer for a few seconds. It wasn't pine, dirt, wet leaves. None of the usual forest smells. It was floral, like perfume. That sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what it was. Not overpowering, not thick in the air, just a clean, distinct scent that didn't belong out there in the middle of fog and trees. I stood still and looked around, which was pointless because everything outside that 20-foot bubble was solid gray. I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the fog swallowed everything, and almost as quickly as it came, the smell faded out like someone had closed a door. I didn't know what to do with that, so I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had walked through earlier. Maybe I'd passed a group and didn't see them. Fog does weird things. I started walking again. 10 minutes later, I caught another smell, and this one made more sense immediately. Smoke, like a campfire. That clicked right away. Someone had to be camping somewhere nearby, and the perfume smell could have been from them too. It was the most logical explanation I could come up with, and I felt a little better as soon as I had something reasonable to hold on to. But even that didn't last. The smoke smell only hung around for maybe half a minute before it disappeared completely, like it had been switched off. Then I noticed the third smell, and that's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. It was herbal, almost earthy, and the second it hit me, it yanked a memory out of my childhood. I knew the scent. I recognized it instantly, but I couldn't name it. I couldn't place where it came from. That combination, familiar, but completely out of context, made my skin prickle. That was probably the point where I should have turned around. I can admit that now, but at the time, I didn't want to. I'd come out there to clear my head, and I didn't want to let some vague weirdness chase me back to my car, so I kept going. For a while, things settled. The trail felt normal again. My breathing evened out, and I started to think I just spooked myself for no reason. The fog was still thick, but it was manageable in a slow, careful way. And right when I finally felt a little calm, I saw a light up on the ridge to my left. It was a flashlight beam, clear and deliberate, moving across the higher ground. That ridge runs alongside the main trail, but it sits way above it, maybe 100 feet higher. And there aren't marked trails up there. I know that for a fact because I've looked at maps before, trying to figure out if there was a safe way to get up there. There isn't. The terrain is steep and ugly, and you'd have to push through dense brush and sketchy ground to climb up from where I was. But someone was up there anyway. The beam turned on, swept across part of the ridge, then shut off. A few seconds later, it popped on again in a different spot, like the person was moving and scanning. It wasn't steady like someone walking with a light. It was on-off, repositioned each time. In that moment, the music I'd been playing suddenly felt like a mistake. If anyone was up there, they could have heard it. So I shut it off and just listened. That's when I heard whistling. On its own, whistling isn't sinister, but in the fog, at night, with someone above me where they shouldn't even be, it made my stomach drop. And the part that really got to me was the thought that if I could hear the whistling, they absolutely would have heard the music I'd had going, which meant they already knew I was out there. By then, I was several miles into the trail. The smart move was to turn around immediately. I knew that. But I also knew there was a small overlook spot ahead, a place where the trail opens up and you can usually see out over the trees during the day. I convinced myself I'd go there, take a breather, and decide what to do in a clearer headspace. When I reached the overlook, I found something that erased any calm I still had. On a flat rock near the edge, there was a stone sculpture sitting there. Not a natural rock shape, not a pile of stones from the trail. A deliberate little arrangement, like something made and placed. The second I saw it, I felt it in my chest. I didn't stand there analyzing it. I didn't walk closer. My body made the decision before my brain finished catching up. I stood up, turned around, and started heading back the way I'd come. And then I heard fast footsteps coming toward me through the fog, from the direction I needed to walk. They were close. Too close. Rapid, heavy steps, unmistakably human. Not the uneven pattern of an animal. Not the light movement of something small. This was a person moving fast. It happened so quickly I didn't even have time to plan anything. The footsteps were practically on top of me, and I realized I couldn't just take off running without knowing where I was going. So I froze where I was, bracing myself for whatever was about to come out of the fog. And then, right as the footsteps reached me, they stopped. Just like that. Dead stop. I can't really explain how terrifying that was. I stared into the gray, straining my eyes, but I couldn't see a shape. No outline, no movement. Part of me was convinced someone had rushed up and was now standing completely still, just outside my visibility, watching me. But it didn't make sense. If I couldn't see them, how did they know exactly where I was? I waited a few seconds, barely breathing. Then I pulled out the switchblade I kept on me for protection. My hand was sweaty around it. I held my ground and listened for anything. Footsteps shifting, fabric moving, breathing, anything. Nothing. The silence felt heavy, like the fog was pressing in around me. I didn't want to speak and give away my position, but I also couldn't ignore the obvious fact that whoever was out there already knew where I was. What made it worse was the direction it came from. Those footsteps had approached from the way back to my car. There wasn't another route. If I wanted to leave, I had to walk straight toward where that sound had come from. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to force myself to think clearly, but I couldn't stay at the overlook forever. Eventually, I started moving, slow at first, every step feeling like I was walking into a trap. I expected to see someone at any second. I expected a silhouette to appear 10 feet ahead or a face to emerge in the fog. But as I kept going, nothing showed itself. The farther I went, the more my mind started twisting the possibilities. Maybe whoever had rushed me had slipped away without making a sound. Maybe they'd stepped off the trail and crouched in the brush. Maybe they were behind me now. That kind of paranoia is exhausting. It makes you hear things that might not even be there. Every few minutes, I'd swear I caught an extra step, 1 or 2 footfalls that didn't match my own rhythm, like someone was walking at my pace just behind me. I kept turning my head, looking back over my shoulder, but it was always the same blank fog. No shapes, no movement, just gray. That went on for about a mile, and it was easily the longest mile of my life. I was convinced I was being followed. I could feel it in that animal part of my brain that doesn't care about logic. And then something exploded through the bushes behind me. The crash was so loud I physically jumped, branches snapping, leaves and brush tearing, something big forcing its way through. My body reacted before I could stop it, and I yelled, just a raw, scared sound that I didn't even mean to make. I spun around toward where it came from. But again, I couldn't see anything through that fog. That's when I truly thought I might die out there. Not in some dramatic way, not like a movie, just swallowed by the dark and the trees with no one around to hear it. So I ran. I don't know why it took me so long to start running. Pride, stubbornness, shock, maybe all of it. But once I did, I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs started to shake. And the whole time I could hear crashing behind me. Like whatever it was keeping pace and tearing through the brush. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I just kept going until the trail finally opened up near the lot and my car came into view through the fog like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I fumbled with my keys so badly I almost dropped them, yanked the door open and got inside. I still don't know how I made it back without getting hurt. I don't even know what I was being chased by. But I do know I didn't go hiking for months after that. And to this day, I never got an explanation for the smells, the light on the ridge, the footsteps that stopped right in front of me, or the thing that came crashing through the bushes when the trail was supposed to be empty. Story 3. This happened almost 20 years ago when I was 15. And I still catch myself thinking about it at random times, usually late at night, usually when the house is quiet. Back then, my parents were going through a divorce, and it wasn't the clean, polite kind. It was messy and bitter, the kind where every day felt tense even if nobody was yelling. My mom decided it would be better if I got out of the middle of it for a while, so she sent me to stay a few weeks with my great aunt Lucy in upstate Vermont while they dealt with lawyers and paperwork. I wasn't happy about it. I barely knew her, and it felt like I was being packed up and shipped off because the adults around me couldn't keep their lives together. But I didn't really have a choice. I was 15. I went where I was told. Aunt Lucy lived in this huge Victorian house that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 1960s. She owned the entire building. The top 2 floors were rentals, and she lived alone in a massive unit on the first floor. The place looked like something out of a movie. High ceilings, old hardwood floors that creaked in certain spots, ornate trim around doors, and that heavy antique smell that old houses have, like wood polish and dust that's been there longer than you've been alive. What I noticed almost immediately was that Aunt Lucy didn't use her space the way you'd expect. She had this big master bedroom with tall windows and antique furniture, the kind of room you'd think she'd be proud of. But she didn't sleep there. She slept in a small den off the living room instead, like she'd chosen the least impressive room in the whole apartment to make her bedroom. I asked her about it, trying to be casual, and she told me the main bedroom got too much morning light. It sounded like an excuse, but I didn't push it. Then I made the mistake of asking if I could sleep in that room since she wasn't using it. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her. It wasn't a long argument or anything. She didn't have to raise her voice. The look alone shut me up. And you have to remember, back then you didn't talk back to older relatives, especially not ones doing your family a favor. So I dropped it and stopped asking questions. The first few nights I stayed there, I started hearing footsteps above us. At first, I didn't even think twice about it. There were tenants upstairs. People move around. Maybe someone worked nights and kept odd hours. But the thing that bothered me wasn't that I heard walking. It was how consistent it was. The footsteps didn't sound like someone casually getting up to grab a glass of water. They sounded deliberate, back and forth, over and over, like someone pacing the length of the apartment in a straight line. It happened every night. After about a week, it got to the point where I couldn't just keep pretending it was normal. One morning at breakfast, I brought it up to Aunt Lucy. I said something like, "Whoever is upstairs walks around all night." Her face changed immediately. Not surprised, not confused, just tight. Like I'd stepped on a topic she didn't want touched. Then she told me the second floor had been empty for over a month. I remember blinking at her, now waiting for the rest of the sentence, like maybe she meant one specific unit was empty, but she repeated it like it was settled fact. Nobody was living up there. I told her I'd been hearing someone every night. I insisted, and she just shook her head and said it was the building settling. Old houses creak, wood expands and contracts, that kind of thing. But what I'd been hearing wasn't random creaking. It had rhythm. It had a pattern. Her explanation didn't fit, and I think she knew it didn't fit. She just wanted it to be the end of the conversation. The next morning, I told her I wanted to see the empty apartment for myself. She didn't like that idea. I could tell right away. She hesitated, and for a second I thought she was going to flat out refuse. But I kept pressing. I wasn't rude, but I didn't let it go. Eventually, she agreed. Like it was easier to just show me and get it over with than keep arguing. She unlocked the door to the second floor and we went up together. Just like she said, it was empty. No furniture, no boxes, no signs anyone was living there. The air was stale and the rooms had that hollow echo that vacant places have. But as we walked through, I noticed something on the hardwood floors that made my stomach turn. There were scuff marks, not random scratches. Fresh-looking marks, like shoes had been dragging along the same route over and over. It was so clear you could almost trace it like a path, from the front of the apartment straight toward the back, the exact line I'd been hearing at night. It matched perfectly. The pacing I'd listened to in the dark wasn't in my head. Something had been walking that floor again and again. I pointed it out immediately. Aunt Lucy glanced down at it, and without missing a beat, she said it must have been left by the previous tenants. But it didn't look old. It looked recent, like it had been made days ago, not months ago. I said that to her. I told her it didn't make sense. She dismissed me like I was being dramatic, like I was a kid trying to scare myself. And she rushed the tour along, steering us back down the stairs. That evening, she suggested we watch a movie together. That might not sound strange, but it was the first time she had offered to sit down and do something with me like that. Most nights, she did her own thing, and I did mine. So when she suggested it, I got this uneasy feeling that she was trying to distract me, like she was trying to keep my attention anchored to something else. We sat in the living room, and the movie played. As it got later, the footsteps started up again upstairs. Same pacing, same steady back and forth. I looked at Aunt Lucy, waiting for her to react now that we both had to be hearing it. She didn't even look up. She just reached for the remote and turned the volume higher, like the sound from the TV could drown out whatever was happening above our heads. I remember sitting there, staring at her profile in the glow of the screen, realizing she wasn't confused. She wasn't curious. She was avoiding it. That was the moment it really hit me that she knew something and didn't want me anywhere near it. The next day, I called my mom. I told her what was going on. I explained the footsteps, the empty apartment, the scuff marks. I expected her to brush it off or tell me I was just anxious because of the divorce. Instead, her tone changed in this way that made my stomach sink. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't sound surprised. She told me very directly not to mention the footsteps to Aunt Lucy anymore. She said it was a sensitive subject. That word, sensitive, stuck with me. Not nothing. Not you're imagining it. Sensitive, like there was an actual reason nobody wanted it talked about. Near the end of my stay, I woke up one night around 2 a.m. because I had to use the bathroom. The apartment was dark and silent, and the air felt colder at night, like old houses hold on to shadows. I used the bathroom and started walking back toward my room, still half asleep. As I passed the staircase that led up to the second floor, I glanced over without really thinking. The door at the bottom of the stairs was slightly open. I'm sure it hadn't been like that earlier. I'd noticed it before. Aunt Lucy kept it shut. Always. Through the crack, I thought I saw a faint light moving up there. Not bright like an overhead lamp, more like a small beam shifting around, the way it would if someone was holding a flashlight and walking. I stopped for maybe a second. My heart picked up. I stared into that narrow opening like I could force the fog in my own brain to clear enough to understand what I was seeing. And then I made the simplest decision of my life. I went straight back to my room and got into bed. I didn't bring it up to Aunt Lucy. I didn't ask. I didn't confront her. I just wanted out of that house. If we hadn't watched that movie together while the footsteps happened overhead, I might have convinced myself she was somehow doing it, playing a cruel trick, walking around upstairs to mess with me. But I knew that wasn't possible. She was right next to me the whole time, and the pacing had still gone on. When I got back home, my mom refused to explain any of it. I asked her more than once. I pressed her the way I'd pressed Aunt Lucy, and she shut it down every time. It caused a real wedge between us, one that didn't go away quickly. I think she assumed I'd forget it. I didn't. Years later, I heard from a cousin that Aunt Lucy sold the building and moved to Florida. My cousin also told me something else, something the family apparently knew and kept quiet. There had been some kind of incident in that second-floor apartment back in the 1990s. Someone died there, and the circumstances weren't clear. The family tried to bury it, keep it out of conversation, keep it from becoming a story that followed them around. And according to my cousin, that was around the same time Aunt Lucy inherited the building. I've never believed in ghosts. I'm not saying that to sound tough or closed off. I just don't. I've always thought ghost is what people reach for when they don't have a better explanation, and I've never been comfortable calling something supernatural just because I can't solve it. So when I think back on those nights in Vermont, my brain keeps trying to build a normal answer out of abnormal pieces. Maybe Aunt Lucy had someone hidden up there, Someone in trouble, someone she didn't want the family to know about. Maybe she was being pressured or blackmailed into letting somebody use the space, and keeping her mouth shut was the price. Maybe that old incident my cousin mentioned never really ended, and the person responsible still had some kind of leverage over her. Or maybe none of it is true, and my cousin was repeating gossip that grew legs over time. I honestly don't know. What I do know is my mom knows something. She knew it back then, and she still refused to tell me. And that's the part that never stopped bothering me. Not the footsteps, not the scuff marks, not the faint light behind a cracked door at 2 in the morning. It's the silence afterward, and I've come to accept that this is probably one of those stories that's never gonna have a real explanation.